Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome back. In lecture 28, we will start composting, and this is the first part of the lecture. So, the different concepts that we will cover are on composting, the Solid Waste Management Rules 2016, and then what it talks about composting, benefits and costs of composting, marketability of compost, the composting process, and the different components or factors that are considered in the composting process, such as oxygen and aeration, moisture and particle size, temperature variation during the composting process, microorganisms used in the composting process, thermal kill of pathogens, and pH level during composting. So, composting is the process. It's a controlled process, of course, but as you know that organic waste decomposes naturally, and this results in different kinds of gas emissions such as carbon dioxide, methane, and also it results in sometimes in bad odor. If the composting happens in anaerobic conditions, then it will result in bad odor as well. And also because whenever certain materials decompose, you will see some amount of vector infestation as well. So, that's the natural process. Every organic matter decomposes, and composting actually utilizes this decomposition process. So, composting is particularly important in the context of India. Why this process, the importance of this process? Why? Because of the nature of our waste that we generate, because most of the waste that we generate from our homes are organic in nature, and that means these are kitchen waste particularly, and also because of the climate in most regions in India, which is more or less to certain extent humid, certain extent also hot, and so that's what actually facilitates composting or facilitates the decomposition process, which is eventually utilized in the composting process. And in the other way around, we can also say that the soil in India also has low carbon content. So, it's low carbon soil, and compost probably would be beneficial for also the soil in India. So, we can use compost for general conditioning of soil as well as also for agricultural purposes. So, now how do I define composting? If I take the definition given by CPHEO, then we can say that composting is a process of controlled decomposition of the organic waste, typically in aerobic conditions, even though it can happen in aerobic as conditions as well, resulting in the production of stable humus-like product, that is compost. So, that means it's the same decomposition process that we are talking about, but it's a controlled process. That means we will control certain parameters of the reactions that takes place, and because we can control the parameters, we can control the time, we can control what sort of quality the final product will have, and so that is why we have to control it, right? Now, because it's a decomposition process, primarily we use biological processes, and as you know, we have learnt earlier about aerobic and anaerobic processes. Aerobic is when the decomposition happens in presence of oxygen. So, aerobic composting is faster than anaerobic composting, and anaerobic or trench composting is usually not preferred because of higher, bad odor, as well as the process is slower as well. Now, the composting result in accumulation of several macronutrients as well as micronutrients for the plants, which could be eventually taken up by the plants if this compost is applied to plants, and macronutrients such as nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium are the results of the composting process. Now, composting happens on the weight fraction of the municipal solid waste. That means we have learnt earlier that the municipal solid waste, there is a dry fraction and the waste fraction, and of course there is the hazardous waste fraction as well. So usually the dry fraction sometimes includes the hazardous waste fraction, which eventually has to be separated or sorted, whereas the wet fraction is already segregated at the household level in most cases. In certain cities there is still mixed waste, but in most cases we are now segregating our waste. In that case, the segregated waste fraction of the waste goes for composting. Now, in case the waste is mixed, that means the wet waste is mixed with dry waste or with certain other materials. In that case, we have to do some amount of pre-treatment. So, pre-treatment, pre-sorting, pre-processing, whatever we can call it in by different names. But what it means is that means we have to do some amount of sorting to take out the organic waste or the the organic content out of this particular waste, which eventually goes for the composting. And because it's mixed waste, there is chances of contamination remaining. So that's why we have to do compost quality checks as well. So as per Software Management Rules 2016, composting has been made mandatory. For example, resident welfare associations, market associations, gated communities of greater than 5,000 square meter or institutions of greater than 5,000 square meter, hotels, restaurants, all of this, particularly bulk generators should treat and dispose segregated biodegradable waste through composting or biomethanation. We will learn about biomethanation later. So, because we are talking about biodegradable waste, segregated of course. So, in that case, this segregated biodegradable waste should be treated via composting, and it should be done within the premises as far as possible. So, a welfare association or a colony will probably should try to do the composting within its boundary itself, but if not, then it can also look into some options of decentralized composting or composting at the ward level for that matters. Now, decentralized compost plant or biomethanation plant should be within or in vicinity of vegetable, fruit, flower, meat, poultry and fish markets, ensuring hygienic conditions. So either this compost can be treated, this kind of organic waste could be treated within the colonies or within the associations and all, or it could be sent to a decentralized plant as well. And in any case, decentralized compost plant has to be provided for treating market and other kinds of waste. Now, segregated biodegradable waste should be transported to compost or other biomethanation or other sorts of processing plant. So that means transportation is also now made mandatory. And transportation is, as you have earlier learned, that transportation is very costly. So definitely if I go for decentralized or on-site processing of biodegradable waste to make it compost, obviously we will save on the transportation cost. Why? Because after composting, automatically the volume of the compost is, the volume of the organic waste reduces a significant amount. It reaches around 15 to 20% of the actual volume of the waste. And of course, you will require, smaller vehicles to transport it, and it is transported directly for marketing to the distributors and so on. So in case that should be taken out of the ULB's jurisdiction. So overall, if I would have not done for a composting at a decentralized level, that is at the ward level, in that case I would have to transport this entire amount of waste to the landfill site or to other sites where it would be eventually processed and disposed. So that's why transportation cost is actually reduced by a composting process or decentralized composting process. ULB should also should use only compost for parks and gardens in urban areas, and no chemical fertilizer should be utilized. So that means ULBs within its jurisdiction, whatever parks and other gardens and other sort of green areas that they maintain for maintaining soil quality or improving soil quality, or we also call it soil conditioning, the ULB should utilize their own compost, the compost that is produced in the urban area, and no chemical fertilizer should be utilized. So that is to facilitate the use of compost. So construction, operation and maintenance of solid waste processing facilities is now made mandatory for all urban areas, and usually it is suggested that decentralized facilities should be, we can engage informal waste workers or the waste recycling sector should be, integrated with this particular, this kind of this organic waste processing facilities or composting facilities, and we should try to involve the private sector, which will improve the efficiency of the entire process. So that is how the software management rules covers composting, and this is the different points that they have made mandatory, and this has to be really taken up in a big scale in Indian urban areas. Now, what are the benefits of composting? One benefit we already talked about, it's reduction of the transportation cost. But in general, composting reduces waste for final disposal, thus increasing the design life of other waste disposal and processing facilities. Now, it not only increases the design life, it also improves the efficiency of the processes that are taken up in those kind of processing facilities. Now, processing facilities or disposal facilities could be a landfill site, could be a incineration plant, like where waste is incinerated or we convert waste to energy, or it could be a co-processing plant or wherever it is. That means if I do composting, then automatically what happens? The contamination of the waste from the dry waste or the recyclable waste reduces, and automatically we can, use those recycling facilities in a better efficient way. And also in case of landfill or even in some other facilities, the design life or the period for which those facilities are designed could be extended. Now, what are the other benefits which comes along with this? It enhances recycling and incineration operations, which we discussed, reduces air pollution from burning of waste, because we are sending less waste for burning or incineration. The organic content is less, so automatically the air pollution would be less. It reduces methane gas generation at landfill. Organic waste is the reason why so much amount of methane gas is produced in our landfill sites. So if I can take out the organic waste, automatically the methane gas generation would be lessened. And also, as you know, methane is quite potential compared to carbon dioxide. The effect on greenhouse gas emissions is also lessened. So, because organic waste contains a lot of moisture, so if I remove organic waste, it also reduces leachate production and treatment at landfill sites. Reduces surface and groundwater contamination. Same leachate goes and mixes with groundwater. So, if I reduce leachate, obviously contamination would be less. Then, composting has two issues. One is the scale of composting. That means we can do it at the house, at a residential scale. We can do it at a decentralized scale, or we can do it at a centralized scale. And also composting, the quantity of waste that comes for composting varies at different seasons, right? Because we are using so many decentralized facilities and also in-house composting facilities, in that case we have flexibility in terms of both the facility size as well as it requires low capital and low operation cost. So, it's not only takes care of the fluctuations because we have so much decentralized options, it also gives us options to go in an urban area to go for different size of different facilities. Then finally, composting produces natural soil amendments and enhances the effectiveness of fertilizer. So, sometimes compost are the quality of compost from the waste that is generated in urban areas is not adequate for growth of plants. So, sometimes we mix some other nutrients to the compost so that we make it more effective, or we use it along with fertilizer. That means with some amount of fertilizer we also make some amount of compost. So, eventually it increases the effectiveness of fertilizers, or we can use it as natural soil amendments in areas like parks, gardens and all, so that it facilitates growth of grasses and all the other, it improves the soil conditions. So, overall composting improves soil quality, water retention capacity, that is the job of a soil conditioner, increases biological activity, macro and micronutrients, and improve pest resistance for crops if it is applied with fertilizers. Optimal effectiveness when used with chemical fertilizers. Alone, instead of alone, it should be used along with chemical fertilizers. Can be used for revitalizing vegetation habitats and wastelands. So, some of the areas, waste areas in and around urban areas, we can actually improve or we can mix compost in those areas, in those soil, that will facilitate growth of vegetation, plants and all, will make those areas more aesthetically pleasing. And use as a biometrics in remediation of chemical contaminants. In case there are chemical contaminants in soil, we can use compost to reduce it. help and bind heavy metals and other contaminants, reducing leachate and bioabsorption. So these are the different positive benefits or the benefits of doing the composting process. So as you can understand, these benefits are environmental benefits, but at the same point of time, there is actual, we have to do the cost calculation of composting because it's an additional process that we are introducing for solid waste management in urban areas. So usually what we have found out is that the cost of production, transportation and application of compost. So it's not only the process of collection, segregation and also production of the compost, but also its transportation and application of this compost usually exceed the direct benefits. So that is one of the problems, because the other option is that we will buy chemical fertilizers which are subsidized by the government and it is usually cheaper in cost as well. So is cost wise, does it really is beneficial for the end user? Probably not. So this has led to low demand of compost for in the surrounding agricultural fields of urban areas, and there is no takers for the compost that is produced in urban areas. So usually it's not only because of the market, but also the compost quality in urban areas. For example, the compost that is produced from mixed residence urban areas remains contaminated with many other hazardous materials as well, if we don't do proper screening or we don't take adequate precautions, right? So in that case, sometimes people will not want to use compost which is produced in urban areas. But the other thing is inappropriate market identification and government support. That means no subsidy from the government is not facilitating the distribution of compost. So, or maybe the market analysis is not probably done. There is no demand for compost in the surrounding area. I have to transport it far away, so that will increase transportation cost. So all this analysis needs to be understood so that we can determine how best we can sell compost, right? So the traditional cost accounting approach, if I consider that, then usually we see that the cost actually exceeds the benefit, and this has led to closure of several plants. So initially government invests money, the plants are started, but eventually because of low demand for compost, the plants get stopped. So this has happened in many parts of the country. So that's why we have to consider the environmental cost and benefits to justify new compost plants or the composting process, because composting brings in lots and lots of benefits like we just discussed earlier, but usually those are ignored when we do this direct cost estimation. So that's the problem. So in general, we can say composting should be done, but at the same point of time, we should make sure that there is adequate market for the compost to be sold, and there has to be adequate government support as well. So financial viability is mainly dependent on the price and marketability of the compost. So this is what we have to consider. Now, Software Management Rule 2016 it also talks about to provide market development assistance on city compost, and Department of Fertilizers, Ministry of Chemicals and Fertilizers, they are the ones which should facilitate all this, right? So this is the main department of the government which is looking into marketability, quality and all these things for compost. And so market development assistance has to be provided for compost, city compost particularly, and also co-marketing of compost with chemical fertilizer. That means for every 3 to 4 bags of compost, we can have 6 to 7 bags of fertilizer. So when you sell 7 bags of fertilizer, you should also sell 4 bags of compost along with it. So that is called co-marketing of compost. So maybe with 6 to 7 bags of fertilizer, this amount of compost is given free. So that means people will use it not by choice maybe, but by giving it using some amount of subsidy, or including the price of compost with fertilizers. In that case, people would be able to use this, and eventually that would be of a lot of benefits, environmental benefits to overall society or for that urban area. So at the same point of time, there has to be a lot of proper testing of compost. There has to be laboratory set up for testing of compost, and guidelines on use of compost vis-a-vis chemical fertilizers. So application of chemical fertilizers, people have been using them, so people are aware of that, but how to apply compost, what is the best way, or what should be the guidelines, these are the jobs that has to be determined by the government, and that will actually facilitate the use of compost. So, to market compost or marketability of compost, we have to consider many factors. First of all, we have to have knowledge of the product. That means the compost that we are producing, we have to first understand about its characteristics, about its composition, about its benefits, and so on. And what could be the potential uses and limitations of this particular product. That means certain kinds of compost are good for banana plantations, other kinds of compost are good for grapes and other kind of cash crops. So, because these are crops which are exported abroad, right? So, in that case, what happens? There are strict regulations on the kind of chemical fertilizers that could be utilized for this particular crops, and usually we have found that compost works best for this kind of crops. So, potential uses and limitations has to be known. That means I can produce compost, but if I don't know how it will be used, where it would be used, then probably I will end up either producing the wrong quantity of compost or wrong quality of compost. Okay. So, realistic estimation of the value of the product for the user. So, that is another thing. That means we should really know how much value this gives, people give to this compost, because there are so many other alternatives available as well. So, in that case, like for example, people can use animal manure, people can use the crop residues in their locally in their own agricultural field, right? So, compost is a competitor of this kind of organic manures, right? So, in that case, we really have to estimate how much people are willing to pay for this product. So, we can, as per the production cost, we can set a price for this compost, but there may not be any takers for the compost. So, this has to be very carefully thought about. So, we have to understand the condition and the fertility of local soils, local agricultural and horticultural practices. Then we know that what kind of compost or what quality of compost is required, and availability and cost of other soil conditioners such as animal waste, crop residues. Pricing mechanism for the sale of compost. So, based on that, we have to determine what sort of price we can set for compost, and FCO or this fertilizer control order from the Department of Fertilizers and all, they have set a minimum retail price of compost which ensures the economic viability of the compost plants, because at the end of the day, the compost plant will produce compost, and if it has to sell it at a certain price so that it can keep its operation going. If it cannot sell it at a certain price, it cannot keep on operating at a loss. So, that means this minimum price guarantee is there, but at the same point of time, if it is too high for the people to buy, then nobody will buy it. So, in that case, some pricing mechanism for the sale of compost, some subsidy, some co-branding, co-marketing, all these issues comes into play. So, end user compost quality and quality requirement in terms of nutrients inside compost, particle size, maturity level of the compost. We will talk about maturity later on. That means we have to, after composting process, we have to allow it for a certain amount of time for it to mature. During this process also, some amount of decomposition goes on, but very minimum amount, and also the complex materials are broken down further, right? So, this maturity level also is important, and once the compost is matured, you will not find any smell coming out of it. It will have a proper texture. So, this maturity also matters. And so, this determines that what people want. Based on that, we should design our compost plant and the processes within that we adopt within that plant. So, the design of the plant is based on the need for the compost quality. So, there are standards which are set up by the fertilizer control order. Even solid waste management rules gives us certain standards. Now, fertilizer control order is the compost that should be compliant with those standards are usually for agricultural purposes, whereas for solid waste management rules, they give us standards for compost as a soil conditioner. So, we can also add some additional nutrients in the compost, and we can say it's a value added compost. For example, PROM, which is phosphate rich organic manure. It's a replacement for chemical phosphatic fertilizers such as diammonium phosphate and single super phosphate. So, this is what we have been looking at. That means we can add